5 real and terrifying stories about dates with strangers. Story 1. This happened last year when I was single. I'm 27 now, but I was 26 at the time. I had just downloaded the dating app Tinder, but I was only testing it out. I had no intention of meeting anyone at that point. I would open it once a day and look through a few profiles. When I say look, I mean scrolling through pictures because almost no one writes anything on their profile. I didn't match with anyone because I didn't swipe right even once. I was just there to observe. There was one guy who seemed to pop up almost every time I logged in. His name was Alan. He was a decent-looking guy, slightly overweight, and probably about 6 feet tall if I had to guess. I think Tinder has a paid feature that makes your profile appear more often, so maybe he was using that. But I didn't care and kept swiping left to say not interested. One day, I was walking my dog in a park near my apartment and saw a guy walking toward me on the gravel path. As he got closer, he nodded politely, and I nodded back. Something about him seemed familiar. It took me a few minutes to think about it, but I eventually realized it was Alan from Tinder. It wasn't a big deal, I thought. We live in a big city, so the chances of running into him were slim but not impossible. Over the next few weeks, though, I started running into Alan far more often, and it became creepy. I started to suspect I might have a stalker. One evening, I was in my room getting ready to go to bed when I looked out the window and saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. Someone was looking into my window. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, so it would have taken some effort to climb up there. As soon as we made eye contact, the person disappeared. I rushed to the window and looked outside. I saw a man running away. I only saw his back, but I'm pretty sure it was Alan. I immediately called the police. They suggested I stay with a friend that night, which I did. The next day, we went to the police station to file a report. I didn't have any way to contact Alan since we never matched online or met in person. But we got creative. While discussing it with the investigator, I opened Tinder and kept swiping until Alan's profile appeared. When it did, I told them, that's him. The police issued a restraining order against Alan, and I'm happy to say we've never crossed paths again. Story 2. When I was 23, I started using Tinder after having little success with other dating apps. A friend told me this one was supposedly better. I believed him and created a profile. It didn't take long before I started getting matches. One of my matches was Gabriel. He was a year older than me, with brown hair and a somewhat artsy style, thick glasses and a beard. We had a pretty good conversation one night, and we decided to meet in person. We agreed to go to a bar I'd been to a few times with friends. It wasn't my usual spot. Never take online dates to your favorite places, just I. Story 3. Hi, my name is Nicholas, and I'm 26 years old, but this happened a few years ago when I was 25. I had been using online dating apps for about 6 months at the time. Like most people, I was skeptical at first. My biggest fear was that I'd meet a girl and it would turn out to be a group of guys playing a prank on me. The thought of humiliation terrified me. However, this story isn't about humiliation. What happened to me was much worse. I matched with a girl named Karen on the dating app Bumble. She was my age, with blonde hair and a few tattoos, exactly my type. After exchanging some messages, I asked her if we could meet in person. She agreed, and I gave her my number. I usually like to move conversations off the app as quickly as possible because it feels more personal once you have someone's number. However, she didn't text me. Instead, she kept using Bumble's Messenger. I figured she just wanted to make sure I was real before sharing her personal information, which I respected. Karen suggested we meet at a small bar downtown. It was within walking distance of my apartment, so it was perfect for me. I left my place early and arrived about 10 minutes before the agreed time. When I got to the bar, I noticed it was closed. It was a Tuesday night, not exactly prime time for bars to be open. I opened the app and messaged Karen, letting her know the bar was closed. She replied and suggested another spot a little farther down the street. She also told me there was a shortcut through a nearby park. I agreed to meet her at the new location and started walking. As I headed toward the sidewalk, I checked my messages again for any updates from Karen. She had sent me another message saying she was already there and that I should hurry through the park. I picked up my pace. It was 8 p.m., and the sun had already set, so the park was almost completely dark. The small pathway cutting through it had no lighting, and I felt uneasy about walking there. Instead, I decided to jog along the sidewalk to avoid keeping her waiting too long. When I finally arrived at the bar, I was out of breath from running. I stood outside for a moment to catch my breath before going in. While doing so, I checked Bumble again, only to find that Karen had blocked me. I stared at my phone, confused and still panting. Why would she block me right before our date? After catching my breath, I went inside the bar. I assumed it was a mistake and thought I'd just find her and exchange information if things went well. I walked around the bar for a few minutes, but Karen was nowhere to be found. The place was small, and she definitely wasn't there. That's when I started piecing things together. She was leading me into a trap. She had probably suggested the first bar knowing it was closed, then directed me to the park, where an ambush was likely waiting. Thankfully, when I arrived at the park, something felt off. I couldn't explain why at the time, but I trusted my instincts. She must have. Story 5. After my marriage ended, I was in a tough financial spot. I was working part-time as a waitress and renting an apartment I couldn't afford. It wasn't luxurious or anything, but I wasn't earning enough to keep up with the rent. That's when I started using Tinder to meet new people. I'd used it before, in fact, that's how I met my first husband. One night, I was at home swiping through the app, but no one really caught my attention. Maybe I was being too picky, or maybe I wasn't over my ex yet. Then an interesting profile popped up. His name was Martin, and he was a few years younger than me. Normally, I'm into older guys, not much older, but I'd never dated someone younger before. I went through each of Martin's photos several times. They showed him in different places, a white sandy beach, another in Mexico City, and even one where he appeared to be standing in front of a private jet. I know this sounds shallow, but that's what initially made him stand out. That wasn't the only reason I was interested, though, it was just what caught my attention at first. I swiped right on Martin, which was the only right swipe I'd made that night, and then put my phone away and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, opened my phone, and saw I had a match. I knew it was Martin because he was the only person I had swiped on. I opened my messages and saw he had already contacted me. All he said was hi. That was a bit annoying to me. If you're going to message me, at least say a little more than that. But this time, I let it slide, and we started chatting. After about 5 or 10 messages each, Martin asked me out on a date. I agreed, and we made plans for the following Friday night. He took me to a really nice restaurant, much fancier than I would have suggested. He was slightly awkward, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. We had a decent conversation, but there were more awkward silences than I was used to. Still, it was a first date, and first dates can be uncomfortable. When the bill came, I was a bit nervous that Martin might want to split it. I didn't know how much it would be, but I knew I couldn't afford it. That's why I was relieved when Martin grabbed the check without hesitation. After that, we parted ways, and I went home by bus. Over the next few weeks, Martin and I went out a few more times. As before, we had a good time, but something about him felt off. It was like he was trying too hard to impress me. It was clear he had money, and he didn't mind spending it on me. The dates got increasingly extravagant. One weekend, he took me on a river cruise that must have cost at least $3,000 in total, all for a woman who wasn't even his girlfriend yet. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it felt like a red flag. Things came to a head when Martine texted me, inviting me on a trip to Mexico. While it was tempting, I wasn't ready to take that step. Feeling bad, I decided to end things with him via text. After I sent the message, my phone rang. It was Martine. I answered, and immediately, he unleashed a torrent of the most vile, hateful insults I had ever heard in my life. This man was furious. I had never seen this side of him before. While we were dating, Martine had been polite and shy. I held the phone to my ear for a minute or two as he continued yelling, but the insults didn't stop, so I finally hung up and turned off my phone. I was scared. I didn't know what this man was capable of. I also knew he had been to my apartment once or twice before, so he knew where I lived. The next morning, I turned my phone back on and found dozens of missed calls and a ton of messages from Martine. I don't remember the exact content of the messages, but they were filled with the same insults as before. I ignored him for the next few days, but eventually, I decided to call him to try to de-escalate things. When he answered, he immediately started yelling at me again. I tried to calm him down for a minute or so, but it was useless. He even demanded that I pay him back for all the dates we had been on. I wasn't in a financial position to do that, so I hung up again. The next night, I went to work. At the time, I was working a night shift as a waitress, and Martine was on my mind all night. I was worried he might show up to confront me about the money, or worse. I got off work around 1 a.m. and took the bus home. When I arrived at my door, my heart sank. The door was wide open. I cautiously stepped inside, and as soon as I did, I knew someone had been there. My mind immediately went to Martine. I called out, "Hello," but got no response. I walked through my apartment, fear coursing through my body. When I got to my bedroom, I noticed something on my bed. It was a piece of paper. I picked it up and flipped it over. Written on it were the words, "You're dead." That was enough. I ran out of the apartment and didn't go back. That night, I stayed at a friend's place and called the police. They were able to arrest Martine based on my testimony and the evidence they collected from my apartment. After interrogating him, they discovered he was completely broke and had been paying for our dates with borrowed money on multiple credit cards. I was confused by that for a while, but then I saw a documentary on Netflix that made it all make sense. In the documentary, a guy used Tinder to impress women with lavish gifts and expensive dates, then tricked them into lending him money, which he never paid back. My relationship with Martine never got that far, but I suspect that's where it was headed. That would explain why he wanted me to pay him back afterward. After that, I never heard from Martine again. I've been much more careful about who I meet online since then. It reminds me of an old saying my grandfather used to use, "If it seems too good to be true, it probably is."